Hey, this is Tom Matthews, and you're watching the Slash Track Network. Stay tuned.
Hey everybody, it's CJ Graham, Jason, Friday the 13th, part 6. I just want to make sure you guys know you're listening to the 80s slasher librarian.
Hi, this is Kane Hodder, better known as Jason from Friday the 13th, Victor Crowley from Hatchet. You are listening to the 80s slasher librarian. Keep listening, or I'll kill you.
Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning. The Novelization by Landon Turner. Chapter 8. "Tommy! Tommy!" Reggie screamed. The killer suddenly stopped walking towards the ladder and snapped around to face Tommy. Tommy was instantly frozen with fear, as if someone had injected him with a tranquilizer. He was transfixed on the image of the man wearing a hockey mask covered in blood, oozing from the gash in his chest and on his arm, and wielding a machete. Then the voices came back stronger and louder than ever. "Die! Die! Die!" They grew louder and louder, throbbing like a giant tumor, like some kind of deformed growth in his mind that was growing and pushing on his brain. And all he could see was Jason Voorhees standing before him. The killer and Tommy locked eyes for several moments. The killer wasn't sure what to make of him, Pam thought. It was as if he was deciding whether to kill him or not. Or maybe it really was Jason Voorhees back from the dead to finish Tommy off. If the killer wasn't Tommy, it had to be Jason. They both stared at each other like it was a Western showdown. Tommy was seemingly in a trance. He didn't move or run. "Run, Tommy, run!" Pam screamed. "Run, he'll kill you! Listen to me!" "Jason?" Tommy muttered under his breath. The killer slowly advanced towards him. Tommy still couldn't move. He just watched, mesmerized in total shock. He was oblivious to Pam's urging. He watched as the murderous brute advanced towards him. He was staring off into the distance, replaying the entire night at Crystal Lake in his head. And now it was playing out right in front of him. Again. For all he knew, it could be another dream. It could be another hallucination. It was just like in his dreams, Jason coming towards him and not being able to move. He had no idea that what he was seeing was real. Deathly real. More real than he could have ever imagined. He heard Pam screaming his name just like Trish. It had to be a dream. It had to be a terrible dream. He'd wake up in the morning and Jason would be gone. Jason came closer. "Remember, Jason? Don't you remember?" The voices played in his head. It was his own childlike voice. It was the words he had said to Jason on that horrible night. "Die! Die! Die!" All he could feel was the sheer helplessness he had felt as a 12-year-old boy when he had faced him before. Jason raised the machete into the air. Tommy still didn't move. "Tommy!" Reggie shrieked. "Run, Tommy! He'll kill you!" cried Pam. And then the machete came down, and Tommy didn't get out of the way. The fire that burned across his chest suddenly galvanized him, breaking him from his trance. "No!" Pam cried in despair. Tommy fell, suddenly incredulous as he touched his hand to his chest, only to discover his hands were now stained red with blood. There was a gash across his midsection. Jason walked towards him menacingly. "Up here, Tommy! Tommy!" Reggie begged him. Tommy still lay on the floor in shock at the red that blossomed across his chest and blemished his hands. The pain was unbearable. It felt like a hot iron had been slammed down on his ribs. As the killer closed the gap between them, Tommy felt something in his left pocket. It was the pocket knife his father had given him. Now enraged and terrified, finally coming back to his senses, Tommy fished it frantically out of his pocket, flipped it open, and thrust it towards the mad killer's groin. The blade of the knife penetrated deep into the inner part of Jason's thigh. Jason growled, and Pam and Reggie cheered hysterically. The masked murderer went down on all fours, clutching at the knife in agony. Tommy, still bleeding profusely, staggered towards the ladder. Tommy, up here, come on, Pam cried. Hurry up, man, Reggie exclaimed. Tommy slowly made his way to the ladder, the pain almost knocking him to the ground again. It coursed through his entire body. It was as if 1,000 bullets were ricocheting around inside him. He clutched at the deep, bleeding gash across his belly, trying to fight through the excruciating, stinging sensation that spread across his abdomen. The killer managed to pull the knife out from his thigh, and he hurled it aside. With the help of the adrenaline that was now surging through his veins, Tommy reached the ladder, and with urging from Pam and Reggie, he mustered up all of his strength and started climbing one rung at a time. Come on, Tommy, he thought. You need to protect them. Just how he had protected Trish. That was all he could focus on. The sound of Pam's voice calling to him urgently was the only thing keeping him going. Her voice then started to fade in and out of earshot. He was losing blood. He began to feel increasingly lightheaded. He was more than halfway there. Jason staggered to his feet and stalked towards the ladder, taking his time. Come on, Tommy, you can do it, Reggie cried. Suddenly, Tommy's foot slipped and he teetered, losing his balance, wincing at the pain that ravaged his body. Take my hand, Pam yelled. She extended out her arm towards him and he reached for it with all the strength he had left in him, and she and Reggie both pulled him up onto the hayloft. Jason started climbing the ladder, one rung at a time, perfectly stealthy and in no hurry. He had plenty of time to catch them. Now they were trapped in the hayloft, nowhere else to go. Jason reached the loft. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in the incandescent white light. He scanned the loft, searching for them. His breath was slow and calm. Tommy was lying on his stomach. He had lost consciousness. Jason tilted his head and flipped Tommy over onto his back. He lay there motionless. Jason moved away from him and focused on his moving targets. Where were they? He listened, but only heard the rain pattering on the roof of the old barn and the wood sagging and creaking under his heavy boots. Rows of hay bales were stacked against one wall, and the other wall held a shelf of tools. The loft doors were open, creating a precipice that looked down onto an old rusted tractor harrow. Rows of sharp spikes jutted upwards towards the sky. Jason walked, slowly, patiently. The killer knew he had time. His fingers gripped the wooden handle of machete in a talon-like grasp. It was his prey that was running out of time. As he passed by a large bale of hay, he saw a fleeting shadow out of his peripheral vision. Someone ducked back behind the hay. It was too late. Jason had seen Reggie crouching down behind the hay. Reggie slowly stood to his feet, facing the monstrous psychopath. Jason slowly walked towards the young boy, tilting his head, observing him. He tilted his head to the other side like a curious dog. Then he suddenly lunged at Reggie, slamming the machete down on a wooden beam inches from him. Reggie lurched backwards, cornered against the wall. As Jason raised the machete again, he felt the axe handle come down right on his shoulder blade, and he grunted. He spun around to face Pam, who was wielding an old axe that was missing its blade. She swung it again like it was a baseball bat, and Jason effortlessly moved out of the way. He advanced towards her. Pam stumbled back, looking behind her to see where the loft's open doors were. She swung again and missed. Then he countered and swung with the machete, knocking the axe handle out of her hand. She screamed out in terror as she looked behind her to see she was right on the edge of the precipice. 10 rows of spikes lay below her. She cried out in peril again, imagining how it would feel for every one of those spikes to tear into her. There was nowhere to run. Jason was eye to eye with her, cornering her back against the precipice. She teetered, almost losing her balance and plunging to her death, but managed to stay up on the loft. Jason came at her. She tried to run around him, but he blocked her at every move. He raised the machete. No! Pam screamed. Hope was almost all lost until Pam looked at Reggie, who was waving his arms to get her attention. They made eye contact, and Reggie motioned for her to get out of the way. All of a sudden, Reggie climbed as fast as he could on top of the bale of hay, and he pounced like a wildcat onto Jason's back. He let go just as Jason went pitching forward from Reggie ramming him. Pam dove to the side, her shoulder slamming into the wall as she cried out in pain. Jason fell, his arms flailing, disappearing down the side of the barn and out the loft doors. The machete hit the floor. Then there was silence. Pam and Reggie caught their breath and listened. There wasn't any noise, not a thud, or the sound of him falling on the spikes, just the rain. Where had he gone? Pam and Reggie both inched towards the open loft doors, searching for the mad killer. Suddenly, he lunged up and grabbed Reggie by the leg and pulled him towards the precipice. "No, Pam!" Reggie shrieked in abject horror. He was being pulled off and down onto the spikes by Jason, who had been holding on to the door frame of the barn doors below. Jason wrapped his meaty fingers around Reggie's ankle and twisted, resulting in the boy being brought to tears as he frantically clung for dear life to Pam. "Reggie!" Pam screamed. "Help me, please help!" Reggie cried. Tommy's head began to move slightly. His eyes fluttered open and then grew wider as he saw what was happening. It was a murderous tug-of-war between Pam and Jason, and Reggie was the rope. "Help!" Reggie screamed and screamed again and again. Tommy lay there, still in immense pain. He just wanted to die, to never have to face this world again. Then the voices came. "Die! Die! Die!" This time he felt something different. They were energizing him, and he suddenly felt the same rage that he had felt back in 1984. "Die! Die!" It echoed in his mind. It was as if his whole body felt it. Those words pulsating in his veins. That son of a bitch had to die. With the voices giving him an incredible amount of strength, Tommy slowly dragged himself up onto his feet and lifted up the discarded machete. A surge of power coursed through his veins. It felt like nothing he had ever felt before. He curled his fingers around the wooden handle, feeling the weight of the heavy blade. It felt incredible. And then he was overcome with lust, the lust to kill. He raised the machete into the air like a medieval sword and brought it down, hacking at Jason's hand again and again. Jason released his grip on Reggie, and down he fell, straight onto the spikes with a loud, wet thud. As Tommy passed out from sheer exhaustion, Pam and Reggie hurried to the precipice and looked down. Their jaws dropped in shock. The hockey mask had come off when the killer landed on the spikes. It was the paramedic, Roy Burns. Chapter 9. Pam listened to the hospital's cacophony of grating noises, trying to tune them out as she cradled an exhausted, half-asleep Reggie in her arms. First, she heard the pretty, dark-haired nurse filing her long red nails, then typing at a computer. Then the hospital intercom buzzed. She tuned it all out. All she could hear was the overlay of the horrible night they had had in her mind. She was completely depleted of all emotion, just like Reggie. The roller coaster of a night was taking its toll on both of their bodies. Her legs ached from all the running. Her arm muscles were excruciatingly sore from having to pull frantically at Reggie as the killer was dragging him off the hayloft. The night kept playing again in her head. She heard her own panic screaming and still felt its after effects when she swallowed. She heard the way Reggie had screamed. What got to her was the way that Reggie the Reckless had been shaking like a leaf. Something had finally scared him. This night could have scared anyone, she thought. It felt like a bad dream, as if it hadn't actually happened. But it had. All of the patients and her boss were now dead. She couldn't even care that she was going to have to find a new job. She was just glad that it was finally over. She couldn't believe it had been Roy Burns under that mask, and she couldn't imagine why either. The guy hardly said a word, and was always nice to the patients every time he drove them out to Pinehurst. How could anyone have figured he would turn out to be a psychopath? But maybe it was the quiet ones you have to watch out for. Something had to have made him snap, and she couldn't figure out what it was. She saw Sheriff Tucker making his way towards her down the hospital corridor. He walked up to her, a somber and sympathetic expression on his face. Pam couldn't even move her head to look at him. She stared off into the void, too tired to move an inch. All she could do was gently stroke Reggie as he slept quietly. Her hair was a frizzy, damp mess, and tears stained her cheeks. "How are you doing?" Tucker asked. Pam didn't grant that moronic question an answer. How did he think we were doing, she thought. She just stared ahead, softly rubbing Reggie's head. "Quite a brave kid," Tucker said, gazing down at the sleeping Reggie. Pam still didn't respond, too exhausted to speak. Then the sheriff pulled a leather wallet out and showed it to her. "We found this on Roy," he said. As Pam scanned the wallet, she gasped. A picture of Joey stared back at her. "The kid that got axed at the woodpile? He must have been Roy's son. God only knows why Roy kept it hidden all these years," the sheriff explained. Pam was still too tired to even think too much about it. She looked at the wallet again and then stared back off into the distance. "Roy was a real loner, from what I heard," Tucker went on. "He never even talked much to the other paramedics." Pam listened. "I reckon when Roy got to the scene and saw that it was his son who had been hacked to pieces, His voice trailed off. He saw the pained expression on her face and in her eyes and decided to stop while he was ahead. "We also found these," Tucker said, and handed her an old tattered newspaper clipping. "Jason Voorhees slain," the headline read. A picture of an artist's depiction of Jason was underneath it. A young, deformed boy stared back at Pam. "He must have used the Jason story to cover up his killings," Tucker said. When he finally realized Pam was in no mood to chat, he stood to his feet and sauntered off down the hallway. Pam rested her head on the concrete wall. She took a deep breath, breathing in the stale hospital air. Anywhere was better than being back at Pinehurst, back in that barn fighting for her and Reggie's life. As she tried to shut her thoughts and the memories of the horrible night away, she started to doze off. The night of carnage came back to her as she drifted off into the early stages of sleep. The image of Matt, pinned to the tree like a dead insect on a scientist's corkboard, dried blood caked around his face, his throat slashed, played as if it were playing on a big movie screen in her head. Robin, Jake, and Violet lying in a bloody pile on Tommy's bed. George thrown through a glass door, blood running down his face, his eyes gouged out by someone with inhuman strength. And then the hulking hockey-masked figure of Roy Burns lunged at her through a window as she fought for her life, her hair nearly being ripped at the root, from her hair being yanked by his fist in a talon-like grip. She remembered fighting him with the axe handle and seeing that gleaming machete headed straight for her head. As the machete came down, Pam jolted out of her sleep. Her panic dissuaded when she saw that she was in the hospital, with Reggie sleeping in her lap. The hallway was strangely dim and empty. The dark-haired nurse was gone. The security guard at the end of the hall, watching the door to Tommy's room, was also gone. She stood to her feet, letting Reggie lay down on the row of uncomfortable plastic chairs. Where was the hospital staff? They were nowhere to be found. She walked down the hallway towards Tommy's room, searching in every room and down every corridor that branched off. The hospital was deserted. What the hell? She thought. She glanced at Tommy's room and swallowed hard. A knot twisted in her gut. The door was standing wide open. "Tommy?" she said. There was only a deafening silence. As she entered the room, she saw him there lying in the hospital bed, motionless. His chest moved up and down slowly as he slept. There was the large outline of a bandage across his chest. As she inched closer to the bed, she heard the sound of thunder outside. She turned back to the door. Still, there was no sign of the nurse or the security guard. She came closer. There was a flash of lightning outside the window. Tommy's eyes flew open. "Die!" Tommy snarled viciously. His hand suddenly revealed a long, shining machete. It plunged into Pam's stomach. "No!" She let out a hair-raising shriek. And then Pam was jolted out of her sleep again and started to panic, but then relaxed when she saw everything was back to normal. She was sitting in those awful plastic chairs, still cradling Reggie. The security guard stood like a statue at the end of the hall outside Tommy's room. The nurse was filing her nails again, and the obnoxious sound came to her, bringing her fully back into reality. Her breathing relaxed and her muscles stopped contracting. Everything was okay, she told herself. It was all over. It had all been a dream. Just a hellish dream. She wished she could say that about being attacked by a mass murderer, but it had really happened. All of a sudden, there was the loud shattering of glass. The security guard and Pam both jerked their heads towards the sound. It came from Tommy's room. Pam laid Reggie down on the chairs and ran to Tommy's room, scrambling in behind the security guard. They both stopped dead in their tracks, flabbergasted. The window was broken from the inside. A pile of rumpled sheets lay on the floor. The bed was empty. Tommy was gone. Epilogue. Roy Burns had stared down at the bloody sheet that lay on the grass. He had watched silently as Duke lifted the sheet with a big grin on his face. He was laughing at it, amused by it. It didn't faze him a bit. That's when he knew Duke also had to die. The thought of committing murder hadn't come to him so easily at first. It started with Duke. As his own flesh and blood lay mangled in the back of the Unger Institute ambulance, Roy stayed quiet. Duke had sat in the passenger seat smoking a cigar. The smoke wafted into Roy's face. He hadn't noticed. He also hadn't heard a word that Duke had said. It was all white noise to him. All he could think about was what Joey must have felt in his last moments, the abject terror and helplessness. No one had even tried to help him. Just another life lost at Crystal Lake. Roy Burns first saw the clipping of young Jason Voorhees at the library. He was drawn to it. He didn't know how. He had taken it home to read, and then for the next few days he read some more, and more, and more, until he was staying up all night to research Jason. Jason's name had echoed in his mind ever since he read that newspaper. It played like a broken record as he lay down to get just a few hours of sleep at night, before waking up and driving to work, where he would hear them all snickering and laughing, making jokes about the patients, laughing at them. just like they laughed at Jason, just like they had laughed at Joey. Nuts, they called them. Another day of driving the loonies around, Billy had said. That's when he knew Billy had to die. Then, on the night after Joey's death, on the night of a full moon, Roy drove from his apartment across town, bought a hockey mask at a party store, and drove all the way to Crystal Lake and sat at the edge of the water. He swore he could hear young Jason's voice calling to him, calling for help, sounding just like Joey. That's when the unbearable grief and guilt hit him all at once. That's when he put on the hockey mask. That's when he began to walk. He didn't care where he was going. Something seemed to be pulling him through the night. He just didn't care anymore. All he wanted to do was walk until he died of exhaustion. He had nothing to live for. He had abandoned his only son, only for him to end up with them. The selfish idiots that surrounded him. His co-workers that thought jabbing and jeering at mental patients was funny. The doctors who couldn't help him and refused to protect him. The other patients who excluded him. As he walked wearing the hockey mask, the more he could hear the voices, soft at first, then growing increasingly louder. "Kill for me, Daddy! Kill them all!" It was Joey's voice, calling out to him through the wind. They weren't taking care of you, he had thought, just like they never took care of Jason. This whole godforsaken area of the world had to die. They let Joey die, just like they had let Jason die. Roy himself had been the one to give Joey up to the people who were supposed to keep him safe. Instead, they belittled him and let him die, just like Jason. The guilt was too much to bear, but he couldn't kill himself. That was not an option. Someone had to pay for what had happened. He couldn't die before knowing that they would all pay for what they had done. That's when he heard them, the two kids stranded on the road. "All those loonies should be killed off one by one," one of them had said. That's when he knew it had to be done. No matter what, no matter how, they had to die. Joey would not die in vain. He had taken a machete from a nearby abandoned tool shed and took a flare from the trunk of the boy's car when he wasn't looking. The boy's screams filled him with the elation of sweet vengeance, and he knew he had to keep killing, and he wouldn't stop until the doctors and all of the patients were dead. It was like nothing he had ever felt before. The sudden urge of ecstasy when he had heard their dying cries was too good to pass up. They all were to blame. They all let it happen. He remembered killing Billy next. It had been so easy. He had hidden in the dark of Billy's Charger with the axe that he stole from the scene of his son's vicious murder when the cops weren't looking. Next was Tina and Eddie. All they cared about was having sex, so they had to die. They hadn't cared about Joey. Nobody cared. He remembered her long, blood-curdling scream as she lay naked on the forest floor basking in the sun. And then she screamed no more. He remembered the way Eddie had fought back at him against the leather strap that looped around his skull. He remembered the satisfying sound of his facial bones shattering under the weight of the immense pressure from his head being smashed against the tree like a grapefruit. That's when he had heard Ethel's voice carrying from inside her trailer. "That better not be you goddamn loonies in my woods! I'll blow your fucking heads off!" she had screamed. She, too, had to die. He had felt no compassion or remorse when he buried her own meat cleaver into her skull. He didn't know why he kept killing. The pleasure of inflicting on someone else the same pain that he knew Joey had felt was too great. He wanted everyone to suffer the way Joey had suffered. All he could think was scream the way Joey had screamed as the axe hacked at him. Feel the terror that he must have felt in his last moments. Nothing else mattered. The patients and anyone connected to them had to die next. They treated Joey like nothing. The pain he felt whenever he heard them talk about Joey like he was some kind of alien was only appeased with bloodshed. He had heard it for years. "Hey, did you hear that retard kid freaking out today?" Billy had said. "That retard got the axe today," Duke had said. But all of it was pacified by the sight of red. The rage would be quelled with their screams, but it had always came back, stronger than the last time. It all made sense. He was just trying to do what Pamela Voorhees started. Kill them. Kill them all. Kill all the ones only interested in serving themselves. Heedless of their responsibilities. Careless towards other lives. Make them all pay, he had thought. Make them all pay. Next was Matt. He had seen him walking through the woods behind Ethel's trailer, searching for Tina and Eddie, who were lying dead in the trunk of Roy's car. All he could hear in his mind was, "You never protected Joey, and now nobody will protect you from me. No one will hear your screams." No one heard a thing as the machete slashed across Matt's throat, sending a geyser of blood spraying out. No one heard a thing as Matt choked on his own blood. He had staggered back into a tree, and that's when Roy drove the spike into his head, pinning him to the tree. And then he started plunging the machete into him again, and again, harder with each thrust, feeling better and better with each stab. Then he had ripped the spike out of Matt's head and plunged it into his forehead and hammered it in. He saw George later, taking the trash out. George never saw it coming, and soon he was unable to see anything at all. One death wasn't enough. Every time, he always wanted more. He couldn't stop. And now, Roy Burns felt nothing at all. He was just another lost soul of Crystal Lake. Some people around town swore that the curse of Crystal Lake was all nonsense. But some will tell you straightforward, it was Jason Voorhees that wreaked havoc at the Pinehurst Center that summer. Tommy knew it too. Tommy knew that it was the curse of Crystal Lake, the curse of Jason. It all went back to Jason. And Tommy now knew what he had to do. If he failed, somebody else would be possessed by Jason's curse. It would never end, and more innocent people would die. Unless he had to do it. Somehow, Jason Voorhees had to die. For good. The end. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been the conclusion of Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning, the novelization by Landon Turner. That was Chapter 8, Chapter 9, and the Epilogue. Before I forget, I just want to say, Landon, thank you for not including Tommy finding the mask with the blue chevrons and holding the knife up. I really like what you did, and I think everybody else listening will like it too. You made it really tie into Part 6. That from this moment on, Tommy escaped and was hell-bent on making sure Jason Voorhees was dead, which leads to Tom Matthews, Tommy Jarvis. Little shout out at the beginning of the video there you saw from Tom himself. And Tommy's on this mission now to make sure Jason Voorhees is really dead and really stays dead. I really enjoyed the whole scene in the barn. Great stuff there. It played out really well, a lot like the movie, but also getting to really feel that panic and intensity from the characters and getting into Tommy's mind. You know, it's not just him staring at Roy Burns like he did in the movie, but we actually get to know why he's staring, why he doesn't think it's real. You know, it's just another hallucination. The movie made that pretty obvious, but I really enjoyed getting in his head while it's happening. And I love that Tommy played a bigger part in killing Roy Burns. I actually got to hack at him a few times with the machete. Great stuff there. The reveal, everybody, was anybody surprised? It was old man Roy Burns. And he would have got away with it. Anyways, great reveal, great job there. Love the scene at the hospital. Everything that was going through Pam's mind, you know, just enough to... her life's never going to be the same. There was more kills in this movie and book than I think any of the other Jason movies. Unless you count Jason X, where he causes the ship to, like, destroy that city with, like, 1 million people in it, that dome city. But other than that... you know, she just witnessed so many deaths, co-workers, and all the kids she was taking care of. I'm glad that Tommy got to, you know, it was revealed that he wasn't the killer when the movie came out. I think that would have ruined things. Yeah, I really enjoyed all of that stuff in Pam's mind. I enjoyed the fact that Tommy escaped to go on this, you know, mission to stop Jason, which leads us to part 6. But what I really want to talk about is the epilogue. You did an amazing job there, and I think and hope people will agree with this. The whole thing with Roy Burns and explaining why he became Jason, you know, how it happened, how the bloodlust happened, and tying it to Pamela Voorhees and Jason's death and kind of throwing Joey in there instead of little Jason. It was great. And I hope I did a good job of narrating his thoughts and stuff of him slipping into that insanity, because I could really feel it while reading it. You really showed him slowly giving in to this hatred and anger, and it changing him. And with each kill, he felt less and less until he was just numb to it. In my opinion, if I was him, I would have killed Tommy Jarvis first and hid the body somewhere. That way my scapegoat doesn't come walking into the barn when I'm trying to kill the last 2 people. That's just me. I'm never going to do that. But that's something that's always bugged me about the story. He wants to frame Tommy, but he let Tommy run around to where Tommy could have an alibi. So, yeah. Other than that, which is not your fault because you didn't write the movie, I really enjoyed the epilogue. I want to hear what people thought of that. So listeners, let me know what you thought of that epilogue. The whole thing of getting into Roy's head, finding out how he became Jason, why he wanted to kill certain people. Because that's another thing that bugged me in the movie. Why did he kill this character? Why did he kill this character? Now we know. And it was great. And that led us to the end of the epilogue, where we found out that Tommy escaped and he's going to make sure Jason stays dead. Wonderful chapters, wonderful epilogue, amazing book. I cannot wait to discuss this one with Sean on the Out of Print Slashers podcast. I'm going to hold off on my score for the book until then. If you're curious of what I rate this book out of 10, you're going to have to tune in to the Out of Print Slashers podcast when me and Sean discuss this book, probably pretty soon. I'm going to be moving on to finishing Freddy vs. Ash. And also, I'll be starting up a fan novelization by Jeremy Terry of Child's Play 1, since there was never a novelization written for it. And exciting news, Matthew Costello, the author of Part 2 and 3, is interested in writing a novelization for Part 1 if it was ever offered to him. So we'll have a fan version and maybe in the future an official version. But let me know what you guys thought of these chapters, what you thought of this book as a whole. I cannot wait to hear from you guys. I hope you're as excited about this completion as I am. It was just a really, really great job, and I cannot wait to start up Landon's novelization of Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. Now, going into The New Blood, Landon, if you're listening, I really hope that you take more of these liberties, creative liberties, because you have complete permission to from the fanhood. If there's something you want to take in your own direction, please do it. Do not be afraid to, take things in a different direction or handle them differently. because that is where you shine. That is where your writing shines. You're great at all of it. Writing a novelization version of the movie, but I really love your creative strings, these little strings that come off from the main story that you're creating in the moment. And I'm really hoping to see more of those in part 7. And we really hope that you'll do a part 8 and Jason Goes to Hell as well. And I bet even Adam Marcus would give you some notes, the guy that wrote the movie Jason Goes to Hell. Really nice guy. I can even, holler at him for you and see what he says. This has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying thanks for listening, be excellent to each other, and always remember, the sun never sets on those who ride into it. Good night, good luck, and I'll see you soon. It was the paramedic from the old amusement park, Old Man Burns, and he would have got away with it if it wasn't for those meddling psychopaths.